Yo, what's happening team? I'm Nick, this is Wales in the Movies. Welcome back, croeso nôl to the channel. This is a bit of a different video than I normally make. In fact, it's kind of like a hybrid between the reaction vlogs and the video essays that I'm currently doing. It's also totally unscripted and off the cuff, hence my stammer just then, which you heard. I do occasionally stammer, a bit like Mr. Gwynalf Williams, if you ever noticed. However, today something different. It's totally off the cuff. I've got a nasty, monstrous hangover. Do you know, like that scene in Trainspotting where Begbie's on the coach? That's currently like my central nervous system is currently like that. But what's got me thinking about doing this video today is that scrolling through my timeline in a conceited way, self-indulgent way, I realised that it was 10 years ago today, 18th of April 2011, that I left New Zealand, which I'd been where I'd been for just under 2 years. And a lot of you, if you watch this channel, if you're a regular viewer, you may know, and you've been watching from the start, or you followed my tweets from the start of this enterprise that I call Wales in the Movies, you will know that the seed of what I do here was sown through international travel and international travel experiences, and the conclusion that I came to that Wales needs to sell itself better and hopefully play in a football World Cup as well. But yeah, the seed of this channel came from travel experiences, and today I'm going to tell you a story. So it's not a vlog, it's not an essay, it's unscripted. Here I am, and I'm going to tell you a story about New Zealand, a place called Karekare, and the English miners. So, travelling up and down what the Maoris call Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, or what we call New Zealand, I'd seen like all different types of accommodation. So I'd slept about every type of dig you could sleep in. But I heard the Kiwis often refer to what they call a batch. Stay in my batch, mate. Terrible accent. And over like about an 8-month period before I started traveling around the country, I was in Auckland, and I heard a lot of Kiwis talking about the batches. And a batch, it turns out, is a very small outhouse, kind of like a wee shed at the back garden, which a lot of Kiwis use to sleep their guests or whatever. And I never thought anything of this really until, to my displeasure, while travelling around the country months later, I saw a batch in the flesh and realised why they'd given the outhouse such a weird name, right? So, start the story. This is a story about representation, why it matters and why it's so important in the world of movies. In 2002, I had come back from 18 months in Australia, not New Zealand, in 2002, yeah? And while I'd been in Australia, when I came home, not long after I came home, a very famous bunch of films got made out in New Zealand called Lord of the Rings, which of course made me regret that I hadn't been over there from Australia in 2000, 2001 when I was there. I bought a CD called The Best Classical Chill Out Album, and on it was a track called The Heart Asks Pleasure First from Michael Nyman, and it was from a Lloyd's Bank advert, which is a bit of a Welsh reference. There you go, Lloyd's Bank advert. Anyway, I loved this track. I then bought the soundtrack to the piano, the film The Piano, before ever buying the DVD, and I bought the DVD. So, long story short, between 2002 2003, I got well into the Lord of the Rings films, and I got well into the film The Piano. Now, the Lord of the Rings special editions, if you've ever seen the Lord of the Rings special editions, they're superior cuts of the original trilogy. And also they got a fabulous range of DVD extras. For example, it's on the extras where I learned that J.R. Tolkien was a Welsh learner, a linguist and a Welsh learner who used the Welsh language for the base of his Elven language, Sindarin. So I learned that on these Lord of the Rings special editions, but there's so many fabulous documentary extras on these editions that it takes you all around the country of New Zealand. And I thought, wow, I've got to see New Zealand, right? I've got to go there eventually before I'm too old to enjoy it. And then, of course, I also got into the film The Piano, directed by Jane Campion, which is set and filmed in the North Island of New Zealand. And of course, lo and behold, 6 years later, in 2009, I found myself with a year visa for New Zealand, which eventually turned into a 2-year visa for New Zealand. So The Lord of the Rings really brought me to New Zealand, but also the film The Piano brought me to the place I'm going to tell you about today, which is Karekare. There are few stretches of land and sand that I've been to in the world that can have as much character as Karekare. Not Lord of the Rings, Crowded House wrote a song about the place, and they recorded one of their albums there, I think, and it's a filming location and setting for the film The Piano. It is just almost like a metaphysically amazing, haunting place. And I went there with my fiance. I'd met my fiance in New Zealand. Her name is Megan, and despite spending a year in the UK herself, she'd never heard of Wales until she met me. That's right, a woman called Megan had never heard of Wales. Anyway, she agreed to come with me one day to Karekare because just round the corner there's a place called Piha, made famous by the movie Point Break. That scene where Johnny Moustache and Patrick Swayze are at the end and they're all windswept and, you know, looking lush and all that stuff. So, Lord of the Rings brought me to New Zealand, Point Break brought Megan to Piha, and The Piano brought me to Karekare. So, interesting, Point Break and The Piano, both films of the 90s of totally different genres, directed by women. Maybe the place has a feminine aura, I don't know, but it's definitely got something. Like I say, it's just a hauntingly beautiful spot. When we got there, one of the weird things that Megan had never seen The Piano, and when we got there, she started doing this, which was exactly the same thing as Anna Paquin did when she got there in the film, which I thought was pretty spooky, right? So anyway, we're looking for somewhere to stay for the night around Karekare, and we then go to this local B&B, and the woman who owned it was called Shirley Bond. Shirley says to us, well, unfortunately, we've got no beds left for the night, but if you want, you can stay in the batch. And I was like, yay, I'm finally going to stay in a batch. I've been here nearly 18 months. I'm going to break my batch duck, right? And then, of course, I'd wondered all this time, where did that word come from? And then we got to the batch, and I saw for myself the sign above the building said this. And in that moment, I kind of died a little bit, but also was enjoying the realization that it had in fact come from the Welsh word bach, which of course means little. For example, if you don't know, like Welsh people used to call the toilet tŷ bach, which meant little house, because they were always outside, you see, in them days, just like the betch. So I said to Shirley, the owner of the B&B, and my fiancée Megan is kind of getting a little bit twitchy by this point because she knows what I'm like. I said, oh, by the way, that's interesting. I'd always wanted to know where this word came from, you know. But I realise now it's a Welsh word because it's bach. That means bach, and it means little. So the sign on your batch actually literally means little. You know, isn't that funny kind of thing? And I could notice that she really wasn't into this, and she seemed to be taking a little bit of umbrage, and I was trying to use my people skills to soften her up, and she was saying, no, it's a Kiwi word. It's a New Zealand word, mate, you got it wrong. To which I responded, no, I know it's a New Zealand word. I'm not trying to take ownership of it for Wales. I'm just kind of explaining to you the etymology of where the words come from, because I'm Welsh, you see, and it's clearly come from the word bach, and you've anglicised it to mean batch, and you've Kiwified it to mean batch, which is great. I'm just kind of letting you know. And she was like, no, you're mistaken. This is a New Zealand word, and it was, check this bit out, it was brought here in the 18th century by some English miners. Now at this point, I gave up, you know, I was inside, I was seething, Megan's getting really nervous. She can see I'm like a second away from her rant, you know. And I just tucked my taffy tail between my legs, gave her the $100 for the night, and, you know, pissed off. And me and Megan went and camped down for the night in the betch. And the moral of this story, what is the moral of this story? Well, is there a moral of the story? I think it's symbolic. I've always found that story, that exchange, symbolic of Wales's invisibility in the world. Now, you'd think that the Kiwis, you know, with all they've got in common, the dyed in the lamb's wool New Zealanders who've got a indigenous and colonial language split, who are covered by mountains and lakes, who are obsessed with rugby, who are dominated by a much bigger, more famous neighbour. You'd think that they were kind of tuned in to all things Welsh, wouldn't you? Not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. Even in this context, this person couldn't recognise any Welshness in this story at all. And she believed that these miners who clearly brought the word bach to the North Island of New Zealand were in fact English miners. And for me, it's symbolic. The movies can transport you to places, can't they? Films can take you places. If you look how firmly New Zealand associated itself with the Lord of the Rings, despite the fact that it's not set there. And when you look at all the things that have been made in Wales, yet we haven't associated ourselves with these films at all. And so Lord of the Rings can bring me to New Zealand, Piha can bring Megan to New Zealand, but there's no film still that's going to bring anybody to Wales, is there? And that is the moral of the story, and that is why I do what I do. That is why I believe representation matters, and that is why I believe it's time for us as Welsh people to start telling our stories and to start allowing them to be told. Diolch yn fawr, tara now.